And I think folks need to be aware of, the maximum potential fine, for these things. It's a violation. It's over $17,000. And now,
It's a lot of money.
yeah, it is. I mean, and the TSA has this kind of chart of, what it's the characteristics of the prohibited item, and how many times have you done this, and all these other things, and they arrive at a number. But we are the Armed Attorneys. Today we are giving an update on flying with firearms, talking about firearms and ammunition traveling as checked baggage. Now, this kind of came in through one of these calls we get. We talked to a lot of different folks about a really troubling situation and how we think practically there's an extra step now involved with flying with your firearm to avoid any potential legal headache. But before we begin, share your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. And today, we're going to go over, because it's an important refresher, folks also want up-to-date information, flying with your firearm, and then how, as a practical matter, there's a new step that we would recommend folks take.
Yeah. So, you want to go on a trip, you're going somewhere where you lawfully can have your firearm in that state. So that would be step number one, is always check the laws in the state that you're traveling to ensure that you are lawfully allowed to possess a firearm in that state. Because the worst thing that can happen is you get there and realize, oh no, I can't have a gun here. So step number one, take the firearm, unload it, put it in a hard-sided locked container, and that goes into your checked luggage, the luggage that actually goes underneath the plane. So you get to the airport and you go up and you're going to check your bag, and you need to tell them, hey, I need to declare a firearm. Typically what happens, a lot of times they'll ask you to take the firearm out. Sometimes they'll ask you to open the box and they inspect it right there. I've had it happen a lot of times where they don't ask anything about opening the box. They give you a little card, and essentially you sign it, and the card says that it is your firearm and that it is unloaded. They always tape it to the front of the gun case, put it back in your luggage.
I've seen them throw it in the case.
Have you? Okay.
Yeah.
Put it back in the luggage, and it goes and gets checked. I've had it happen before where they'll take you to a different part of the airport where they x-ray the bag right there in front of you. I've had it happen before where they'll say, hey, stand here for about 10 minutes. If we don't come get you in 10 minutes, you're good to go on your way. I've also had them where they just say, hey, have a nice flight. But what they'll go do is they'll x-ray it after that. And so if it is loaded, that's when you might have some further problems.
Yeah, so hard-sided lockable container. Let's just take a semi-automatic handgun for an example. Probably a good idea, have the slide locked back, so that the agent, if inspecting, can tell the firearm's unloaded. Tricky thing is with the TSA, they consider a magazine, even if there's no, ammunition cartridges inside the magazine, a magazine inserted into the firearm, they consider that loaded. So magazine out of the gun, it can be sitting right next to it. Ammunition, they want it separately enclosed so that it just magically can't shuffle and load the gun or whatever. So, manufacturer's packaging, aftermarket little clamshell cases that hold, individual cartridges, that's all fine. It can go inside the same case, closing it. Every place on the hard-sided case that's capable of accepting a lock, you should have a lock in it. TSA might allege, hey, look, this thing could be pried open and is accessible. So just be careful with that. The TSA kind of gives some weird guidance on locks. They say, only the person should retain the key or combination. But they also say, hey, we allow TSA locks on these things, which I think every TSA agent has a key to those things. So I don't really see how those two things jive. But have you ever had a client have their locks cut?
I have not.
Okay, I've only had that happen once in a decade. So, but they replaced them with different locks and said, hey, here are your new locks. We had to cut your locks. But again, most of these handgun cases do not meet the minimum size for baggage requirements and will have to go inside of a larger piece of check luggage. And that goes for all of these things, firearms accessories, with the exception of, think of a rifle scope. Those can travel on as a carry-on. But all other accessories, all these other things, even toys, they don't want those things going on the airplane itself. You need to declare those at the check-in counter. And then I will say, when you get your bag, I've seen it so many different ways. I don't even know that there's consistent guidance there.
So in my experience, when you go to pick up your bag, it's on baggage claim. So it's just there with everyone else's bags. You don't have to show any proof that it's your bag. I mean, one black rolly bag looks just like the next black rolly bag. So that's something else to think about when traveling with a firearm is that there's the potential that someone else picks up your bag from baggage claim and now
Well,
they
and,
have your
and I'll
firearm.
say, going back to why this isn't consistent, I mean, I've seen it on baggage claim. I've seen it at the airline's bag claim counter, in the baggage claim area. I've seen it held at the airport police department. I've seen every combination of these things. But I'll say, yeah, if it's not on the baggage carousel with everything else, the next place to go is to check the baggage claim area
Mm-hmm.
of your airline, and they'll probably have some guidance for you. But, you know, why this is coming up? Well, TSA, they're always modifying their administrative penalties and fees and things like that. And I think folks need to be aware of, the maximum potential fine, for these things. It's a violation. It's over $17,000. And now,
It's a lot of money.
yeah, it is. I mean, and the TSA has this kind of chart of, what it's the characteristics of the prohibited item, and how many times have you done this, and all these other things, and they arrive at a number. But the last violation I had was a loaded firearm, an alleged loaded firearm. I think their initial security violation they said was like $4,000. So I mean, it's very, very expensive.
It is.
And if you receive one of those, the TSA, they send you a letter. They say, here are your options to resolve it. It might be helpful if you speak to an attorney about that, especially if it's one of these gargantuan fines. The big one is like if they get it wrong, like the nature of the violation wrong, that's one of those things. Absolutely, you want to talk to an attorney about. But the other thing that this can screw up is TSA pre-check.
Yeah, in my experience, if you have TSA PreCheck or the Clear program, you will lose those privileges as a result of having one of these violations. And typically, this is something where I know in our state, in Texas, if you have a license to carry, you don't get arrested. And so sometimes people will say, "Whoa, well, I didn't get arrested, and they let me go on to my flight. I'm probably fine." And then 6 months later, a year later, they get this letter from TSA that says, "Oh, by the way, here's your civil penalty," and
Mm-hmm.
it's a very large amount. Now, to be clear, that does not go on your criminal record. So if you go for a job interview, that's not reflected on that, but you still have the civil penalty, and it's a large amount, and it can affect your ability to have the TSA pre-check, or potentially have problems boarding in the future.
Yeah, so an allegation that, you didn't declare or you didn't properly stow one of these items, they could cause your pre-check to be revoked up to 5 years. Each scenario is a little bit different, but that's can be very inconvenient for, especially for a frequent flyer. Like I don't
Mhm.
fly that much, so it'd be very inconvenient, but it wouldn't be that disruptive for these folks who are flying like every single week. Yeah, that's a nightmare. And then the other thing to note is if you have pre-booked travel at the time that you receive one of these violations, it's very possible that you receive the dreaded SSSS designation. That's the secondary security screening. Now, how will you know if this has happened? Just and this is probably a very small fraction of folks. I mean, we talked. How many people do you talk to who have alleged to have carried into the secured portion of an airport or didn't properly declare?
Oh gosh, it's probably over 200 at this point.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, this happens enough, but if you have pre-booked travel, when one of these things happen, expect that you're gonna get some extra love from the TSA
Hmm.
for travel that's already booked. Kind of a big hint that this might be coming down the pipeline is if you try to check in electronically after one of these events, and they're like, you have to go to your airline's counter to check in. That might be a good warning
Yeah.
that something's happening. Make sure to give yourself some extra time at the airport so that you don't miss your flight. Now, here's what kind of prompted this, us bringing up this discussion now, is I had a kind of troubling situation where someone checked firearms, magazines out of the firearms, and it was just kind of on a whim. He took a photograph of the container before, declaring it, handing it off to his airline. And when he received the firearms, the magazines were inserted into the firearms.
Yikes, that's a nightmare.
No, because again, the TSA considers these things loaded, even if there's no ammunition, no cartridges in the magazines. A magazine inserted to a firearm, they consider that loaded, and it could have caused a big headache. We talked it through. We don't think anything is going to come of it, but that's why I think it is prudent for folks to snap a photograph
That's not a bad idea.
of the layout and whatever, everything you got there. Because again, maybe you get the card that says, firearm unloaded. It goes inside your case. Maybe they tape it on the outside of it. Um, You don't want any allegation of a security violation because it is an administrative nightmare.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's definitely a headache and potentially could cost you a whole lot of money. Going back to what you were saying about allowing yourself more time, anytime you're flying with a firearm, I didn't say this in the beginning, but sometimes they, like I said, they ask you to wait there an extra 10 minutes. Sometimes they take you to an extra part of the airport where you have to wait for your bag to get scanned. So I'd give yourself probably at least an extra 30 minutes if you're flying with a firearm to check it in. Now, typically it's a pretty easy, quick process, but always good to have that extra time.
Yeah, unless your name's Emily Taylor, and that's when you arrive at the airport at the moment that they start boarding. She cuts it too close for my, gives me.
That's that's how my husband is too. We have this fight frequently in our home when we're about to fly.
Yeah, but we hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video. And don't forget to question in the comment section down below. And until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.